You this morning. Yeah, those were the days, right?
Indeed. I remember, yes.
Yeah, a bit of 90s music there from DJ Roberti. You're welcome back. It's the Super Morning Show on Joy 99.7 FM. 8:21 is the time. And we have a big and important conversation to get into. This is big picture stuff, okay? About the future and fortunes of our nation. The Constitution, the 1992 Constitution, which has borne us thus far. Some time back, it was made clear that it could be improved. There could be a few amendments, a few enhancements to it to make it even more of a useful and effective and efficient document. So a process was started, but, that process at some point stalled. It doesn't seem that there's anybody in the political landscape who disagrees that there is a need for our Constitution to be improved, but it's still not happening. Today we want to have a conversation about why and how to make it happen, what those steps should be to make sure that we can improve this living, breathing document. Professor Ernest Kofi Abotsi is the Dean of UPSA's School of Law. He's our guest this morning. We're very happy to have him. Thanks so much for making the time. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Kojo. Thank you for having me.
All right. Okay, so we're going to get into this. We'll lay it all out. But first, there is a reason why this conversation is important now, isn't there, Ray?
Yes, because not long ago, even Newsfast spent the entire day on the Joy Speaker series trying to look at the Constitution. And there are people who have asked, prior to our economic crisis and all of that, that a democracy appears not to be fit for purpose. So something ought to be done to salvage it. There are some who have also moved beyond that to say that our governance system has been hijacked and we need to fix that particular system. Indeed, the entire establishment and the development of the Fix the Country grouping was around the same theme, that something needed to be done fundamentally to fix the kind of system we have. There are some who go as far as saying the fact that we have an economic crisis on our hands, the fact that we appear not to know how we're going about the development of this country are all important elements. But the conversations have always been had. People propose. In fact, if you take the proposals, people have actually taken virtually every section of the Constitution, some mapping it out nicely and suggesting ways that we could improve. The only vacuum is that there appears to be nothing moving it from. So three groups of thoughts. First, amend. Some are saying that, no, we need to overhaul the entire Constitution. Some say select provisions and amend. Then the last group proposed, no, look at how you will better implement it. All of these three, they've now had the opportunity to move it from mere talk into action. At some point, the president was quite categorical in his mind. I don't think he should do anything to this Constitution. No, but we should also even trace it prior to he coming into office. His position was that there was a lot of change that was required. But when he got into office, it appears that position changed to, let's hasten slowly in any changes that we want to do to this Constitution. Then later on, you do recall that he had actually said something like, see, he's hearing a lot more views on that. He's open to a discussion on it, which gives some people hope. But where do we move from mere talking to action? Like many of the things that happen into this country, where can we then bridge the gap? Position ourselves in a way that says that we are done talking. Now it's something that we ought to do, or something will not be done. Where do we cross that bridge? That's, to many people, the main conversation now. And that question remains unanswered for God knows how long.
And you're right about the fact that several conversations have been had recently. That creates a certain opportune nature of timing at this point, because it is the conversation. The IEA has held several lectures over the past several weeks, bringing in prominent people, including our guest today, to speak on this very topic. So there is so much work that has been done, but it's left with the work, if you will. So I want to start from that point, Prof. If you could give us that context, just for anybody who might be coming to this conversation for the first time, where this all began, this whole idea of needing to overhaul, if you will, our constitution, where it began, what has been done, and how we got to this point.
Okay, so in the lead up to the 2008 election, there appeared to be broad bipartisan consensus that the Constitution was suffering certain operational deficits in key areas. Bipartisan, and that's the most significant aspect of it, because the NDC spoke of the need for constitutional reform. The NPP spoke of the need for constitutional reform. And the two parties speaking with the NDC at the time, speaking from the opposition, and the NPP being in power. But the two parties indicated, but in this case significantly, the two candidates were both new. And so you had former President Kofi finishing his term. And so the two of them were both speaking from outside of power. And the broad understanding was that there was a need for some tinkering with the Constitution. Then the NDC came into power, and a mechanism was put in place under the former President Mills, which was the Constitution Review Commission, to try and bring about some proposals for changes to the Constitution. Unfortunately, the bipartisan consensus that characterized the lead up to the election appeared to have waned with the establishment of the Constitution Review Commission, because the NPP was not particularly officially, if you like, supportive of the process. The NDC, or the government of the day at the time, tried to demonstrate a certain degree of bipartisan inclusion, and so certain members of the NPP, or some members of the NPP, were included on the board. I remember the late Apia was a member, for example. It doesn't seem, however, that that effort generally yielded the dividend that the if you like, quote unquote, the NDC government expected. As many people on the NDC MPP side, I think, may have seen that as tokenism of a kind, and so it wasn't really. So the bipartisan character of the process never, or seemed to have never, recovered pre-2008. The Constitution Review Commission, of course, as you all know, did its work, it submitted its reports, and that is where things ended. There has been changes in government since then, with the coming in of former President Mahama himself, and then subsequently President Nana Akufo-Addo. I think the reality is that in the scheme of things, the Constitution Review Commission's work appears to have suffered the political problem in Ghana, which very often seem to be the major obstacle to many things not happening. And the political problem in the sense of there's a perception that it was a certain government's agenda. And so even if the current government thinks of the need for constitutional reform, the question is whether they think of that need through the prism of the Constitution Review Commission's work, which was done under a previous government. So the history of Constitution Review in Ghana appears to have been a major problem, or the major bane. That's the first one. The second reason, which I think accounts for our lack of progress, has to do with what I call the incentive factor. The people with the greatest influence and authority to effect a change are the people who have the least incentive to want to have changes done. I mean, and that's what the difficulty is. For example, Parliament. If you take Parliament, Parliament is the initiator from the structure of the Constitution. Parliament is the initiator and completer of reform. And so where there's any proposed reform, that reform must be started in Parliament, and that reform must end in Parliament, even though under Article 290, the Constitution speaks in rather mandatory terms. So, for example, if the people approve it by 75%, Parliament must pass it. Parliament has no choice but has to pass it. The President has no choice but has to assent to it. Even though those mandatory words are there, Parliament is still the beginner and the end of constitutional reform. Now, some of the key proposals that have been made, which has to do, for example, with the cap on the number of ministers who can be appointed from Parliament. For many parliamentarians, they see that as a loss. Because for a lot of MPs, Parliament has become something of a transit chamber.
Springboard.
I.e., a springboard. It's become a transit chamber or springboard for becoming a minister. And ministers are seen as, if you like, graduated versions of members of Parliament. And so, if you take away the ministerial position, For many members of parliament, it's
It's
parliament
nothing to
itself
aspire to.
is not really. It doesn't have that attraction that many MPs have, and so the position of a minister, or rather the mandatory expectation of the president appointing majority ministers from parliament, is something of a carrot that members of parliament are hard pressed to give up on, and these are the people who should initiate the process for the change of that particular provision. So that's one problematic aspect of it. And then a number of the other proposals also affect the executive. And the executive is not the initiator, even though it's a completer. It shares the completion work with Parliament, but it's also the completer of the process. But it's not necessarily statutorily an initiator. But the executive is an influencer. And that's where the key aspect is. If you look at the Constitution says that no bill shall be introduced in Parliament which imposes a charge unless it is introduced for or on behalf of the President. Now, this means that the President plays a pivotal statutory, statutory reform role as far as our laws are concerned. In this respect, it is difficult to conceive of a serious issue of constitutional reform without an active role of the executive. And the executive, as I indicated, many other proposals recommend caps on executive powers. So some of these key challenges are really impinging on the reform process. And the third reason that I think has resulted in the stalling has been the very model of the proposals. First of all, the proposals appear too many, and many people have said that. Many critics have raised issues about the sheer number of proposals that have been made for changes. And indeed, if you ask me, I think some people who do not want any changes have latched onto that in an opportunistic way and said, look, it's too many of them. Where do we start? I think the model is problematic a little bit. Now, here's the thing, though, and some things are not palatable when you speak of it in general terms, but they are the reality. Constitution reform anywhere in the world has been, you may not like it, but it has been an elitist project. The reason it's an elitist project is because constitution writing and reform are fundamentally scholarly in character too. It is not as if you don't involve the regular people. You have to involve everyone, because indeed these are democracy is about people. It's not about some elite sitting somewhere. But the ultimate construction of things invariably has to be the business, unfortunately, of some few experts, and so as usual, we have to make references to the United States, which is a standard bearer of democracy in the world. But the writing of the American Constitution was by a handful of people, really. Just about 5 or 6 of them. You can name them, the Hamiltons of the world and co. A few of them. And the reason is because at that level, it is subject to a certain level of thinking and rationalization and reasoning and all that, and not to belittle the capacity to think of the average guy, but it is to say that some people process and then others discuss generally and adopt. So it's imperative that we are able to whittle down to an acceptable level the numbers of changes that we can make to a document like this, because wholesale changes and sweeping changes can themselves have destabilizing effects on the document. I have said this, that anyone who frankly takes a back seat and does an introspective review of the Constitution will come to a conclusion that the Constitution is fundamentally a good document. It has had operational flaws, and I keep saying operational because intrinsically the Constitution is still not bad. If you take, for example, the issue about the number of ministers, the problem is not with the Constitution. The problem is the operational deficit aspects of the Constitution. In other words, the numbers have not been capped because there's a certain sense in flexibility. There's a certain rationale for leaving things open for presidents who are number one citizens of the country, having been elected from the millions, to make a value call and a judgment call that we need X number of ministers to reflect the vicissitudes of the times. If you cap it and if you freeze it, presidents may have their hands cuffed in circumstances when they're supposed to have particular ministers and particular departments to reflect new changes in the circumstances of the country at given points in time. Constitutions are written to cut across generations, and so they are endless in that respect. Now, if you look at it from that prism, what it means is that if you freeze things, if you lock things without flexibility, things break up. Because the example I've always given students in the past is that the reason the American Constitution may have stood the test of time, 450 and counting them all, is that even though the Constitution was adopted at a time when the means of transportation was the horse, there was no airplane, there was no internet, the means of communication, sometimes pigeons and birds, there was no telephone, there was nothing. You can't envision the America of 1789 and today, yet the Constitution that was adopted at that time is still being used today, largely because a lot of the things have been drafted in such hortatory, flexible terms that it allows the malleability for change and evolution. If the American Constitution has been written with the level of detail of ours very detailed. This is it's actually less than a third of ours. If it's been written with the level of detail of ours and the level of certainty of ours, you're going to have systemic friction and breakdown, because you simply can't evolve, let's say 100 years from today, when Ghana may be a place we possibly cannot contemplate, and they still have to use the 1992 Constitution to rule and regulate things of that time. So there are all these complications, and it's important that we have the background.
Yeah, because you've raised this one, it is of interest. It's been a fulcrum around which many of the conversations happening now have revolved. Sorry, and it is this: the fact that perhaps even the difference between how the Americans' Constitution has evolved and ours, perhaps even that difference speaks more to a difference in how we are as a people than how the constitutions function. So even in spite of the lack of detail, if you will, of the American Constitution, they have had very few amendments over the years. Very few. You can count them: First Amendment, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment. There aren't that many. In Ghana, in spite of our 92 Constitution, we've still written several laws. Our Parliament has still written several laws to augment and for practicality's sake. I get your point about not capping things so that flexibility can be an advantage in the future. But we also have a situation where the failure to cap has allowed us in our nature to create problems for ourselves. We have interpreted it to our detriment, to the benefit of a few and to the detriment of most of us. So at this point, would it, if the solution is not to amend the Constitution itself to limit that, what's option B? What's the other way of ensuring that we don't interpret these flexible clauses of the Constitution to our detriment?
I wish there's a ready-made option B. But before that, perhaps it would be useful to appreciate the fact that indeed we have had operational problems. So I deconstruct the Constitution in simple terms for non-constitutional law students to understand. I split the Constitution into 4 parts. So like a human skeleton, I strip the Constitution into 4 skeletal parts. That makes it easy to understand. The first one I call the state. The Constitution contains the state component. So if you go into the Constitution, we have organs of states, we have ethos of states, we have actions of states. The state component is supposed to be the permanent component of the Constitution in terms of the permanent aspect of how the Constitution runs.
Right.
So, for example, the public services, that's the state. The fact that we have organs of government, and the fact that we have bodies like the Council of State. The state components are supposed to be the aspects of our lives which is permanent. Government comes, government goes. Then from the state components, we have I call the political. So we have the state, number one, and then we have the political. The political is a revolving part. So government comes, government goes. That's the political. The government itself is part of the state, but the mechanism of becoming the government is a political process. So, for example, the elections. So our elections are electoral cycles, and our various political parties, and the various aspects of our political process. These are political. So the state, the political. Number 3 is what I call the neutrals. We have the neutral parts or neutral organs. Some call them the independent organs of states. So, for example, we have the judicial bodies, we have STRAJ, we have the Electoral Commission, we have the National Commission on Civic Education. The bodies whose operations are not supposed to be political, but whose operations are supposed to provide a neutral balance for the operation of the state. Then finally, we have perhaps one of the most important, the most important part. We have the citizen. The citizen has clear elements of responsibility and rights provided him throughout the Constitution. So, for example, the whole of Chapter 5 is devoted to the citizen. That's fundamental human rights. We have Article 41, for example, which states the obligations and duties of citizens. So we have the citizen spaces. So we have the state, we have the political, we have the neutrals, we have the citizen. This is my skeletal deconstruction of the Constitution. If you look at the operation of the Constitution, virtually all these parts, in different degrees, have suffered deficits. The state, for example, has been the biggest victim of the political. Gradually, we've had a situation in which the state has melted into the political, and the political has sort of absorbed and swallowed the state. The biggest tragedy, unfortunately, happened when there was an attempt to redress a problem by the passage of the Presidential Transitions Act. The Presidential Transitions Act was supposed to stabilize the situation that occurred in 2008, if anyone remembers.
Yeah.
And in the passage of that act, we rather ended up deepening the state that has been absorbed by the political to an extent in which anytime there's election today in Ghana, all boards get dissolved. Reason I'm still trying to understand. Because the boards are supposed to, at a certain level, be part of the state.
Yeah.
The boards are supposed to be boards of state-owned enterprises. The name even starts with state. State-owned enterprises. These boards are not supposed to be political. The membership of these boards are not supposed to be by reason of political consideration. And so why it is that whenever a government leaves power, the next government cannot deal with a new board, that it has to have a new board to reflect the newness of things, still beats my imagination. But that is just one illustrative point of how gradually we've had the state becoming political. All boards, or nearly all boards in this country for state-owned enterprises, have become politically oriented because the characterization of or the character of the appointment themselves reflect.
So if an amendment sought to address that, would you consider that also to be limiting the flexibility that we might need in the future?
Absolutely not. And one of the recommendations perhaps that we may have to look at moving forward in this respect, and I think that I was coming to your question on that, the amendments have stalled partly because people have complained about their number, about the difficulty of going for referenda, the expense and all that. I think there may be three options in going about this. We may look at, number one, parliamentary leadership. Do we want Parliament to lead the process? Number two, amendment of Chapter 25 of the Constitution that deals with amendments itself. And then number three, basically just getting on with whatever it is the process, the proposals that have been made for amendments. If you take the first one, parliamentary leadership or parliamentary initiative, the proposals that were made by the CRC appear clearly to have stalled. But the question is whether Parliament is prepared to start its own process. And if Parliament is prepared to start its own process, what exactly Parliament's proposals are going to be? I have to be clear that the current majority leader has been extremely active, certainly in the last 2 years, in trying to bring back the agenda of reform on the table for national conversation. And I really laud him, his energy, his initiative and drive, and his real personal commitment, which I have to be honest, I find quite impressive. What I still haven't found, however, is a discussion within the House of a roadmap for the process of amendment to start, i.e., whether Parliament is going to listen to, or rather going to review or revisit what has been done under the CRC, see how best it can sanitize the process and start the bills in Parliament, or Parliament is going to start its own initiative. I haven't had much of a conversation on that, and so that remains one major difficulty in that respect. In terms of
which do you think would be a more pragmatic way?
The simplest, and I was mentioning three. So parliamentary initiative, amendment of Article 25, Chapter 25. The third one, which I hadn't mentioned yet, is that of statutory adjustment, or what I call statutory adjustment. That is the simplest way. Statutory adjustment in the sense, and frankly, I haven't heard that in conversations. I probably have missed it, but I haven't heard that in conversations. And it came from my own reflections on this. Statutory adjustment has to do with looking at the Constitution and basically just trying to modify aspects of the Constitution through regular laws, through statutes. Now, I'm saying this because if you pay careful attention to nearly all the proposals that have been made, nearly all the proposals affect provisions that are not capped in stone. They affect provisions that are cast in discretionary terms. So I give the example of the appointment of ministers. The appointment of ministers is a provision that is frozen in terms of it's requiring a referendum. It's an entrenched provision, so you can't just change it like that. However, there is no number on the ministers that can be appointed. What the law says is that the president has to appoint a majority from parliament. The number is not stated. And so if the president is going to appoint 10 ministers, the president has to appoint a majority from parliament, which means the president has to appoint anything above 5. But the number is not stated. So the president can decide, I'm going to appoint 20 ministers, in which case the president has to appoint majority from parliament. So maybe what can be done is that you can have a statutory adjustment that says you can't have more than 20 ministers. That one, the Constitution doesn't say it. So you can use what is called statutory elaboration. You are elaborating on the law through the statute. That is easy to do because all we require is a simple case of parliamentary enactment, a simple law. Another example.
So that you wouldn't then have to go and do a referendum to change that an entrenched clause to say something different.
You don't have to go through that. I'll give another example. Another example is we don't have, for example, a debt ceiling. We have a Public Financial Management Act, but we don't have a debt ceiling. Specific statement on an X quantum of money, perhaps indexed to something for which a government can borrow. Throughout our national history, people have said we've been to the IMF 17 times. So clearly, we've had a reputation of having financial management challenges in terms of Parliament's own oversight. Again, instead of going through a long process of amendment and going through referenda, perhaps we may just want to look at statutory adjustment or statutory elaboration by coming up with a law that caps, for example, debt ceiling, or puts in place strictures that invariably regulates the extent to which our economic management models are put together. In other words, the Constitution invariably has spaces. The Constitution is a framework legislation. Everywhere in the world, constitutions are fundamentally framework legislations. They are supposed to give you the broad framework for statutes to be used to elaborate on processes. What I have seen is that we'd rather have a copious case of parliamentary silence whenever it comes to spaces where parliaments could have filled the gap to pin down governments. We have had parliamentary silence. The only time we see parliamentary intervention is when the Constitution says Parliament has to enact a legislation to complete something. There are a few cases like that. For example, Article 22, where the Constitution clearly states that Parliament has to come out with legislation to regulate women and children's rights and stuff like that. So Parliament did that. But the Constitution doesn't say it in other areas, but clearly leaves gaps. Those gaps could be filled by Parliament without an infraction of the provision, and without a requirement to having to go through the long process. And I think that is one area that we haven't investigated, which I think we can seize upon in the meantime to deal with the two difficulties. The difficulty number one being the incentive of Parliament and other bodies to move ahead with the constitution reform itself, the incentive. The other difficulty for me is the longevity of constitutional rule and the danger of over elaboration from the Constitution itself. In law, we call it ossification. The law will become ossified, and when the law becomes ossified, that freezing aspect of the law will lead to a breaking point. So you avoid ossification for the Constitution, and the way to avoid ossification is rather to use statutory elaboration so that future generations can simply change the statute. If they have a problem, they can simply change the statute without going to the root of the statute, which is the Constitution. So the Constitution can stand the test of time. Otherwise, you are likely to have a case of overhaul once every 25 years, once every 50 years or 40 years. And these things happen because of the cultural tendency. Whatever we do today is a precedent-setting value. It creates the cultural mindset in the minds of our future generation that they would have to do it to. They'll say, if we did it for ourselves, why should we allow them to be saddled with the same constitution 20, 30 years from now?
Yeah.
They have to overhaul the constitution.
It will become a tradition.
Right. The sanctimonious character of the American Constitution is partly because there's a mindset of occasionality that to attempt, you hardly hear a discussion in the US of constitutional reform. Nobody mentions it because it has become almost a sanctimonious subject that if you want a change, the first point of call for an American is the Supreme Court. They don't think of the Constitution, they think of the courts. So any controversy, what you hear of is, we will go to the court. They don't speak of the Constitution. The constitutional change only comes in generationally when a few things have to be tinkered with. But I think the massive wholesale changes is something that we have to be careful about.
We're talking to Professor Kofi Abotsi. We're talking about constitutional reform. And the simple question we're working our way towards is, who takes the first step and what should that first step be? When we come back from these messages, we get to the detail.
Say donut, 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 donut. Hey, donut, 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 donut. Donut, donut. Then come cut up donut. Donut, donut. Malaria super donut. Everybody follow not sa malaria. The 3D till no not now. Ogonto malaria too. Popo. What will it be? I want the donut. Donut. Tobacco. Donut. Lonat scatter malaria. Lonat it scatter malaria.
A quality product from Blaze GVS Pharma. Yenhwehwemu hu se malaria wo mojam ansa na wanum Lonat. Na nam yensearch na malaria no da so wo ho a ko hu doctor.
This advert is FDA approved.
What? It seems Royal Foam did not get the memo. Times are tough. Prices are going up. They're giving 10% discount, free pillows with every purchase. Hey, Royal Foam. Just when you thought all they manufacture are quality but affordable mattresses and pillows, they take it up a notch by being thoughtful in these hard times. Royal Foam has reduced their prices drastically. Buy a mattress, get a free pillow. Enjoy 10% discount instantly, nationwide. Take advantage. Enjoy Royal Foam. Enjoy the best.
Call Royal Foam today on 020-227-1000 for more information.
Royal Foam. Rest assured.
You need to ask yourself, where do you want to go? No matter who you are, trust yourself. Dream big. Break the rules, not the laws. Keep pushing. Everything is possible. Trust yourself. Life is about confidence. Africa, it's your time.
Son, live with confidence.
Do you need money to start a business? Do you need money to expand your business? Are you a government or private sector worker in need of money to sort out emergencies? Do you need working capital loan or do you need an emergency loan? Quick Credit will loan you money so you can repay in flexible terms. It's collateral-free loan with no susu, savings, account opening or deposit wahala. You just need to be a Ghanaian with your Ghana card. Quick Credit covers all forms of loan and so you have no excuse not to work this year and beyond. Call Quick Credit on 030-2200-390 or 059-6920-833. Take note, we do not give loans via the internet. Beware of scammers. We are regulated and licensed by Bank of Ghana. Terms and conditions applied.
Quick Credit. Lending made simple.
Anytime is a good time to have a break. Introducing Munchie Anytime Crackers. It's perfect for break times, party times, movie times, and snack times. Savor the moment. Enjoy Munchie Anytime Crackers anytime. Munchie Anytime Crackers. It's light and tasty.
This advert is FDA approved.
Are you a consistent Tier 3 pension contributor? If yes, AICO. CitySpay is rewarding you for the good habit. Access a loan within 24 hours at just 2.5% monthly. Visit our website www.citispay.com.gh and choose what is right for you. Call us on 0595 738121. Citispay, we leave no one behind.
Introducing the new Techno Spark 10 series. Enjoy a long-lasting 5000 mAh battery capacity plus 18 watts charging pack in an ultra-sleek 6.7-inch Full HD screen with a storage galore of 256GB plus 8GB. You can save every memory and never lose any. 32 megapixels glowing selfie camera and 50 megapixels AI rear camera. Get your Techno Spark 10 series. Visit the nearest Techno accredited shop and join the glowing selfie gang.
Each year, 18,000 children are born in Ghana with sickle cell disease, and 1 in 3 Ghanaians have the sickle cell trait. Many discover their sickle cell genotype only after the birth of a precious child with the condition. But do you know that sickle cell disease can be prevented? It starts with knowing your genotype. Do you also know that sickle cell is not a death sentence? With early diagnosis and the right medical care, some are living to celebrate their 90th birthdays. That is why the International Sickle Cell Center and Airtel Tigo are pushing the Touching Lives initiative to raise awareness. My name is Dr. Mary Anson. Get tested to know your sickle cell genotype. To learn more, visit www.iacc.international.
This initiative is brought to you by the International Sickle Cell Center, ISCC, in partnership with Airtel Tigo Touching Lives.
Airtel Tigo, life is simple.
Coffee in your cup and joy on the set. The Super Morning Show is always the best bet on Joy.
It's to 9 on the Super Morning Show. You're welcome back. Our guest is Professor Kofi Abotsi of UPSA's School of Law. He's the Dean. And today our conversation is about that big picture, the Constitution of the Republic of Ghana, written in 1992. And some years in, there seems to be a general agreement that perhaps it's time we took a look under the hood, did a bit of tweaking to ensure that it continues to be an effective document for our for the guiding of our daily lives. But how do we go about it? How do we even start? These are the conversations that have led us to today. And with Prof. Abotsi, we are hoping that we'll get some clarity on the way forward, because that seems to be the only thing left. The talk, well, it's been done. Now it's time for action. Before we get back into it, we know that life is go, 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 and that it's hard to make time for the things that really count. So at ABSA, they won't let banking get in your way. That's why with ABSA's digital channels, you can bank when, where, and how you want. So you can focus on what and who is important to you. Banking has never been easier. Transfer funds into your savings account, pay your old school union dues and your DSTV subscription, and so much more with a click of your phone. Get things done simply with ABSA's digital channels. That's Africanacity, that's ABSA. Terms and conditions apply. Visit absa.com.gh for further details. Now, are you ready for a once-in-a-lifetime holiday experience? Then it's time for you to make South Africa your next destination, to write your own travel stories while exploring their stunning hidden gems. South African Tourism extends an invitation to you to explore their picturesque country, sunny shores, and stunning landscapes. Visit their country and find diverse experiences like culinary delights, cultural tours, adventures with your loved ones, and amazing shopping sprees. Own the moment in South Africa. Go to southafrica.net to find out how. All right, so our conversation so far has laid the context and explained how far we've come. And now we've started to talk about the detail of how to go about the implementation. Several options have been suggested by Prof. Abotsi, including one interesting suggestion of statutory elaboration, being perhaps his idea of how we could cut a lot of the red tape, jump a lot of the problematic processes that we currently envisage we would have to go through if we were to change some of these, especially entrenched clauses of the Constitution. Now, with that in mind, I want us to now, actually maybe wrap up one thing on the statutory elaboration, and then we'll move into the question of where we should start. So I can see how it will solve a lot of the implementation problems, but does it actually address the motivation of those who are bound to lose some benefit once these adjustments are put in place? If indeed you make the process easier, will it somehow make them more willing to make these changes that will make them less powerful, if you will?
Some time ago, 2-3 years ago, I think, I did have the pleasure of giving a lecture at UPS, and I mentioned the fact of something which is not necessarily the most popular thing, but which I still think is the main thing that needs to be, focused on. Look, our problem is not constitution review. Our problem is actor incentive. In other words, what incentives actors have to respect the Constitution. Every scholar of constitutional law will tell you that constitutionalism is achieved in two ways. It's achieved by substantive and institutional processes and procedures, but it's fundamentally achieved by the willingness of the actors to stay within the bounds of the limitation. If actors have no desire to stay within the bounds of the limitation, human ingenuity being always a step ahead of the law implies that the law would always be a failure. For the simple logic of reality is this: no creature is bigger than the creator. And law, being a creature of humans, is invariably one step behind human ingenuity. And so if people want to breach the law, with the benefit of lawyers and their own smartness, people can be advised, and actors can be advised on how to evade legal provisions. Every legal provision has an evasive technique around it once you can discover it. Therefore, if actors do not have the desire or willingness, do not have the self-motivation to be restrained, to be public service oriented, to be ethical, if they do not have these, the best laws are useless in the face of actors who want to do their own thing. So fundamentally, the starting point is exactly your worry, which is if you do the elaboration, etc., and people still don't have they do not want to respect it, how far are we going to come? We're not going to go anywhere if governments do not want to stay within the boundaries of the law. So constitution review is only a fraction of the problem. The key problem is us, the leaders, the people who are in charge of implementing the law. If these people do not have the desire to respect the law, constitution review is nothing more than palliative care. It doesn't go beyond palliative care. It's just window dressing, in simple words. So I think fundamentally we must come to that point where public service is ethically driven. And I know it's easier said than done, but we have to start from the premise that people who go into public service must have a certain modicum of ethics in them. We are on the cusp of another election in 2024. Electorates must ask that question of their leaders. What is your ethical threshold, and what is your ethical level, so to speak, as you enter into public service? I mean, beyond the fact that you have good and great ideas, what is the extent of public service ethos that we have in our public servants, for which cause we elect them into offices? I think if we do not address this issue, no law at the moment, we are trying to craft laws as if they are police officers. But assuming that the laws are the police officers we expect them to be, police officers are not spirits. They are not everywhere every time. They can only do their work to a degree of efficiency if the public cooperates. And that's what we tell you, the public cooperation. For policing is all about public cooperation. If the public refuses to cooperate, the police system collapses. And so fundamentally, laws can only work if the implementers have a desire to respect the laws. And I think that has been the major bane of the Constitution. And so changing this Constitution is only palliative care if we don't address the issue of, are our leaders willing and ready to accept limitations? Sometimes it should be self-imposed limitations. You know, if you look at the Constitution, you pay careful attention and you realize one thing. Anytime leaders impose limitations on themselves, it's because the limitations serve their purpose, which is very funny. Article 182, the one dealing with the introduction of bills into Parliament unless it's accompanied by a memorandum from the President. That is a self-limiting interpretation that has been put on Article 102. Because of that, for nearly 30 years, there were no private members' bill. So it was one of the few, if not the only, that was limiting in terms of the construction that was put on it. But it turned out to be self-serving. It was serving executives, it was serving Parliament, it was serving governments, so to speak. The ones that should rather have a deliberate limitation read into them, from the appointment of ministers to the many other instances in which one expects that we should have a limitation read into it with a view to, as it were, promoting constitutionalism, innately promoting constitutionalism. For those ones, very often we do not have the self-limitation or the self-limiting reading imposed on them. So I think it's imperative that we address the issue of ethos, public service ethos. Yes.
So as things stand, it would have to come from the executive in order for Parliament to start any process to amend anything.
In the circumstances, yes, because a good number of the proposed amendments require charges. I mean, they will require some deployment of public resources. And so that is one instance in which I see a likely challenge, that if you do introduce them without the intervention of the President or without the intervention of the executive, you are going to introduce bills that require financial deployments, and the President has not been involved. That may result in the violation of Article 182. And that could be a problem.
For such amendments, the executive, or the President in this case, becomes the initiator.
Indeed.
How do we get him to initiate? Since we've all theoretically agreed that these changes are important, perhaps we now have even better ways of doing it if we are to follow your suggestion of statutory elaboration and so forth. Now we've all agreed. How do we get the President to actually take that first step?
The introduction of bills is one of the discretionary rules of government. Is one of the discretionary mandates of government to come to a conclusion or a point that a particular law is required in the interest of national administration. Government has to come to that point. So you can't force the hand of government without convincing government that there's a case to be made. I think one of the best circumstances or times when we can get this done perhaps may also be now, because you have a government that is ending its term, and therefore, in terms of incentive, it doesn't have much. It's leaving the system, so it doesn't have much incentive, whether positive or negative. It doesn't have much incentive. So perhaps from the standpoint of incentive, I suspect that this could be one of the times when a carefully crafted strategy in terms of governmental engagement, because it has to be engagement too. Look, you can't shame government into introducing legislations. And so the strategy should not be one of pressure. It shouldn't be one of public opprobrium or public pressure in terms of what needs to be done. Because, as I indicated to you, there's a history to the reform process which sort of affected the bipartisan dynamics in the lead up to 2008. Some people have argued that perhaps we should have allowed Parliament to have started the process instead of the late former President Amil's government who introduced it. Others have argued that Parliament will not start anything. And so, until the President does it, Parliament wouldn't have done it anyway. Indeed, Parliament had the option of even doing something alongside, or they could have even merged. But Parliament just never came around. The executive did what he had to do. The long and short is, one needs to engage government strategically, not forcefully. And as I indicated, a public pressure, shame-oriented strategy may not necessarily also work. Because in the circumstances of where we stand at the moment, the question really is, who are the beneficiaries of constitutional reform? And many will argue is the general Ghanaian populace. Whether constitutional reform in the scheme of policy priorities is or should be on the front burner of the current government, many would doubt that. Whether in the scheme of so many dynamics, which includes the current situation with the IMF, economic challenges that we're trying to overcome, and the general, the general sensitivity of things in light of the world economy, the country's own economy, and a few other things, whether this should be one of the priority considerations for which government should invest money. People may have good reasons why perhaps this should be one of the collateral things instead of mainstream things. Nonetheless, as I indicated, we may still have to have some constitutional reform, and this could be the best time. The question is, if we are saying some, then which are these? Who does the prioritization? Who does the sifting of the priority from the collateral? And where do the various works that have been done by others in the past, especially the Constitutional Reform Commission, where does its work stand in the scheme of disengagement with government moving forward? So these are questions that ought to be answered. And as I indicated, I think a pivotal person in all these is the current majority leader, who has actually shown a lot of energy. In the last 2-3 years, he, together with the IEA, as you mentioned, have shown they have been able to keep the conversation alive. And I suspect that given his influence and his leadership of the party in Parliament and in Parliament itself, perhaps he is the best bet in the circumstances to engage government and to help kickstart the process and make sure that this thing results in Parliament ultimately for some forward movement.
What does he think of your suggestion of statutory elaboration rather than amendment of the Constitution in some instances? What does he think of this?
I don't know what he thinks of it. I haven't had a conversation with him on this. I've had the pleasure of being on a number of the platforms that he's organized. I've had the pleasure of being there and speaking about this. I haven't spoken of the statutory elaboration aspect. As I indicated, the statutory elaboration suggestion is one of my reflections of recent times. As we think of ways around things, it is, in my opinion, the line of least resistance. Because what we have is a case of inertia. We have suffered systemic and structural and practical inertia. And as I think of how to get around the inertia, I think the statutory elaboration model appears to me to be the line of least resistance.
Just before we take another break, I just wanted to ask this. So, because I've now started reflecting on it. It does sound like a simple way through. But in theory, a statutory elaboration could be saying something different from what is in the Constitution.
No, that will make it a breach. So there are two options. Elaboration is supposed to extend or expand without violating. Where the elaboration is inconsistent, it's a breach. There are two different things.
Right.
So, for example, I gave the example of the appointment of ministers.
Right.
The Constitution doesn't speak of a ceiling. The Constitution speaks of majority.
Right.
Okay. So you can deal with the issue of the ceiling without affecting the issue of the majority and without affecting the power of appointment in the first place.
But
so you'd have elaborated without.
It would still, however, be possible for somebody to take a statutory elaboration to the Supreme Court for interpretation. I mean, alongside the Constitution, take it to the Supreme Court and say, okay, so this statutory elaboration suggests that there should be a cap of 50 ministers. Well, looking at the Constitution, I think that perhaps I would like the Supreme Court to tell us whether this indeed is in line with what the Constitution provides. Supreme Court could then end up overturning it, depending on how good or bad the arguments are.
Absolutely, yes.
So does that not make it a bit vulnerable as a way forward?
Good question. It's a risk. Statutory elaboration is not on the same level as constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendment cannot be challenged on grounds of violating the Constitution. So long as it's been adopted in accordance with the process, because it becomes part of the Constitution, and therefore you can't see the Constitution as a violation of itself. So statutory elaboration can suffer that. However, statutory elaboration, when carefully done, while that risk still persists, when carefully done, I doubt will suffer from that prospect of being struck down by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can always strike down statutes that they think are in violation of the Constitution. But as I indicated, if, for example, the Constitution doesn't contemplate a limit, a violation of the Constitution will happen if the Constitution had said, for example, there should be 60 ministers, and then you have a statutory elaboration that says that says a president can only appoint 40 ministers. That would be a violation. It's straightforward, because the Constitution says there's a number, and you have said there can only be a lower number. That's a violation. What we have is the Constitution leaving the matter open. And a statute which is trying to elaborate on the constitution by way of operation says in any given time the president can appoint X. The constitution doesn't address the issue. So it's a space. And that space has been regulated by the statute. And this is not going to be the first time. There are many instances of, okay, so I'll give you an example. We have a Criminal Offences Act, which has rules on all kinds of things criminal in Ghana. The constitution doesn't say things on murder, etc. But the Criminal Offences Act says if you commit murder, you commit an offense. Now, the fact that the constitution doesn't say anything on murder doesn't mean we can't have a law on murder. So we have created a law on murder. That law on murder, we have created it pursuant to the authority of Parliament to pass laws under Article 11 of the Constitution and Article 93 of the Constitution. Therefore, Parliament has filled a gap which the Constitution doesn't speak on, but which is necessary in the scheme of things governance. That's what we're talking about. So statutory elaboration fills the gaps on things that are left open. If they are taken care of and there is a statutory elaboration which is inconsistent with what the Constitution says, that's a violation. It's a different thing.
Right. So let's come back to the who takes the first step. And, you know, you've kind of talked about how really the solution is not to force the president into action. But can he be coaxed, bearing in mind the fact that his own position on it has gone through some evolution? There was a time when he thought it's the right thing to do, we need to get it done. Then there was a time when he thought, yeah, constitution is okay as it is. Then there was a time when he thought, well, he could be persuaded. How do you make it in his interest as a president who at this point is seeing out his final term, is perhaps interested in legacy? How do you make it in the interest of a president in such a position to initiate these actions?
Remember when I mentioned the case of bipartisanship, I told you that both candidates were then not presidents.
That's right.
So the late Professor Atta Mills and His Excellency the President Nana Akufo-Addo, they were both candidates. The political pressures and dynamics that impact candidates are different from the political pressures and dynamics that impact presidents. So the president suffers from internal political pressures in addition to the external one. But the internal political pressures tend to weigh heavily on them once they become presidents. And so it is not surprising that a president will go through a certain level of evolution in terms of what he thought as a candidate and what he eventually faced as a president. Now, though, the dynamics too may be a little different because now he's on the cusp of exiting power, and as indicated, he may just be in a legacy mode at this stage. You know, how best do I get remembered for this? And as a lawyer and as someone who's been in the state's eye for quite some time, he invariably has had ideas and perspectives about the Constitution and key aspects of the Constitution. I think that a carefully crafted strategy would work, and that's why I suggested that I think a good leader for this could be the majority leader. There are two key reasons why I think this could work. Number one is optical. Optically speaking, the majority leader leading this makes it look like Parliament is involved. That's number one. It makes it look like the NPP is involved. That's number two, because it's the NPP. And the NPP is in government. And then number three, it makes it look like parliamentary leadership is also interested. His own relationship with the president may also further help boost this in this respect. And so I think that a strategically crafted relationship could work. So that's number one. That's why I think the majority leader could be involved in this. But as I indicated also, sometimes the narrative publicly creates the perception of us and them. And when you create those perceptions too, constitutional reform typically doesn't work in that framework. Constitutional reform has to be all-inclusive because whatever the outcome of this reform is, it's for the nation and it's going to be transgenerational. So it is the kind of thinking through that should really go beyond just you and I even sitting having this conversation, or a political party thinking they want something changed or otherwise. Because let's be honest, political parties only have a limited stake in a governance framework. They form the government, that is true, but I broke the Constitution down into 4 key parts for you. I indicated that my skeletal deconstruction of the Constitution gives me 4 key features of the Constitution, or 4 key parts. The first one being the state, the second one being the political, The third one being the neutrals, which is the independent bodies, etc. And the fourth one being the citizen. These key centers of power and influence, or these key centers of stakeholders within the constitution, implies that the political is only one. And so political parties and what they even think about the constitution, frankly, should not matter more than what we think of. The only reason we give them all the preeminence is because they form a government and the will delivers a power and influence to get things done. And so I think that a carefully crafted strategy will work if the president's engaged, particularly because in his last term, he's likely to be in a legacy mode.
So, I mean, this puts a lot of expectation on the head of the majority leader. Who else can chip in here? Can we see a role for civil society, for the media and so forth in bringing this to a boil?
I will not reveal things that I know in terms of my conversations with the majority leader and a few other things I know he's doing. But I can assure you that he's been trying to garner support from across the spectrum of actors, stakeholders, players, experts, and all kinds of people who have not only an interest, but the competencies to help drive the process forward. And my thinking is that is exactly what he needs to do, and that's what I think he's doing from my conversations with him and knowing this. I think he's trying to put together the key players, as you mentioned. Civil society are critical in their core. A good number of civil society bodies, including IDEG and the Imanis of the world and the CDDs of the world, have done a lot of work in this area of constitutional reform. And I think on platforms that I've spoken to, I've seen these actors represented, which tells me that the majority leader has been building a good coalition of key actors to move this forward. The important thing is to devise, articulate, and execute the strategy that works. Because I think one thing is clear: between now and 2024, December, when we have the major election, it is doubtful, and I think everyone generally agrees that it is doubtful that you can have the Electoral Commission activated, resourced, energized, and properly equipped with all the manpower it needs to be able to administer multiple referenda in Ghana. Everyone doubts that that's going to happen. It's just almost impossible between the time span that the time frame that we have.
Winston reminded us that we do have district level elections coming up.
That's another one.
Is it practical to perhaps attach a referendum to that, to deal with maybe one or two of these entrenched clauses?
Well, two difficulties. Referenda or organizing a referendum is a major thing in itself. Organizing it alongside district level elections, which are district specific, and then referenda, which will be nationally oriented, can create a confusion in the minds of the electorate in the first place, if you're not careful in terms of what they've been dealing with or voting on. Not to mention the character of the questions presented. I think the problem with the referenda at the moment is, are we even going en masse? So assuming we're going with all the proposals now, and they are 10, 15, 20, are we going with 10, 15, 20 proposals en masse? If you agree with the following, take yes. If you don't, take no. In 92, that's what happened. There was one big constitution. If you agree, say yes. If you don't agree, say no. There were no middle grounds. This is not exactly the constitution. These are questions. Are we going to have all these questions on one sheet, and then we're going to take yes or no? Will people understand what they're voting on? Or are we going to go individually and have proper effects so that people understand exactly what they're voting on? You can even have explanations and some low-level campaigning in terms of go yes, go no. People say things for it and all that. Are we going to go on that model, or we're just going to go there and block? What is the capacity of the EC? The capacity of the EC in the scheme of things at the moment, particularly because of the time frame involved, we are so close to another election. I think that's what bothers many people. So these strategic things are of worry, and that's why it's imperative that perhaps we even have an understanding that, okay, of all the proposals, perhaps we're going to go with two. And of these two, we're going to work with them between now and X time, and we're going to have the EC resourced. The work is going to be done. But there must be some rational consideration of what can be done, what needs to be done, and the roadmap in terms of being rolled out between now and then as to whether this should be done. Because I think between now and 2024 there must be some changes. Question is, how many can realistically be done?
Now, in many countries, the Law Commission is very important. They actually do the thinking mostly, with academics being on board. And they are actually also institutions that cut across governments. So they have a lot of trust from various governments, and they tend to believe in them. if we cannot get, and you mentioned the majority leader, can a law commission liaise with the majority leader, getting others like the IE and everybody on board to spear the kind of thing that will be even acceptable to people who do not necessarily believe in a government-led approach or the certain government-led approach? I hope you get my point.
I do. I do. You want my answer?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Because I was asking a subsequent one anyway.
Right.
But yeah,
The Law Reform Commission, invariably, the name is what it suggests it is. It's supposed to be this stable state entity that does, sustainable reform of our laws over time. It's the thing, though, is I think we may have gone past the Law Reform Commission at this stage, because the Law Reform Commission probably could have structured and organized. They could have done what the CRC did. But commissions like CRCs were also established because of the gravity of the issues involved. So we went past the Law Reform Commission to put together a commission just for the purpose. So the CRC has done what the Law Reform Commission could have typically done in terms of do the research, gather things, put them together, initiate the process, influence, activate Parliament and influence Parliament through the process, and ultimately help get laws passed and reformed and all that. So that's the Law Reform Commission's mandate. Maybe where it can come in now is probably to see if it can also join the influencing process.
Okay.
Because at this stage, the constitutional process is clear. And the Law Reform Commission is not given a specific task by the Constitution. The constitutional process only speaks of Parliament itself and speaks of the President. So Parliament itself, starting the process once the bill is introduced in Parliament, the Constitution says Parliament will have a first reading and that's it. Nothing more happens. It goes to a referenda and it comes back and Parliament passes it and the President assents to it, and there are no ifs and buts. These are mandatory things. So the Law Reform Commission is not given a specific mandate in terms of what it has to do at this stage, apart from its own general institutional influence, which it can bring to bear in the process by, as it were, as I said, joining the influencing process. Or it can be roped, I think maybe it can be roped into any coalition that is built.
The other point that's also be, of course, and you mentioned that constitutionalism may not necessarily be something you write into a law. In fact, a limited government depends on the human beings who are implementing the Constitution. Is that a conversation that we would ever be able to get around it? So how do we put in place people who respect these limitations and would not be on an endless route to try work around them, abuse them, and disrespect them?
I think it was a famous American president who once said, if men were angels, laws would not be needed. Which is to sum up the fact that human beings by nature, we have a tendency towards corrupting power. It's our tendency, Lord Acton also said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. We have a tendency, so perhaps if tomorrow you give me power and you don't give me the accompanying restrictions or laws, perhaps you will not recognize my name anymore. Who knows, I may become something else. Because power has a tendency of changing our character. But it's hard if you ask it from the angle from which you ask, in the sense of how do we get leaders to respect the law? I have been a teacher of legal ethics for years, but I can tell you that I have always started my classes back in the days by saying that I'm about to teach you a subject that should not be taught. Because there are some things you can't teach. Ethics you can teach. You either have it or you don't. Once you know the basics, that these are the do's and the don'ts, you can't ingrain ethics in people. So that's the problem. So teaching people ethical behavior, sometimes it's the best you can do is to remind them of the ethics that these are the. So for example, if you go into the Constitution, we have a whole chapter on code of conduct for public officers. It's in there. I wonder how many times ministers are made to read that chapter. I wonder if they've even read it at all.
We've been trying to actually pass a law to strengthen that part.
Indeed, it's very bare. It's not a very
statutory elaboration.
Well, that's correct. Indeed. That's correct. It's one of the barest. It's if you ask me, I'm not sure why the constitutional framers were, but they didn't do solid job on that chapter. That chapter is bare. But at least I take consolation in the fact that it's there in the first place. You know, there are some constitutions you probably don't find anything like that. So I take consolation in the fact that we don't have a constitution which is empty of ethics. There's something, a whole chapter on code of conduct. It could be bettered. But even with the minimum we have there, the question I'm asking is, how do we induct ministers into office by ensuring that they understand that chapter? Because it's key.
Yeah.
It's so essential to a minister's concept of public service and his concept of the ethos that drives the office. But how often do we have ministers appreciating that chapter? So we have all these petty challenges that affects our own concept and our conception of public service. People are good managers privately, but they tend to be bad managers publicly. It tells you that it is not for want of competence as much as it is for a want of a conception of public service. The idea of rationalizing the private asset but dissipating the public property, which derives perhaps from the fact that what belongs to the collectives belongs to no one. And so, anyone. It's consistently reflected in the character of public servants whenever they get appointed into office. So it's hard to train people on the good and bad of doing things because people already know them. The truth of the matter is they know them. And competency is not the issue, but it is a mindset. And I think the mindset component is something that perhaps something can be done about. Unfortunately, the only way you can achieve a good mindset, a critical mass of people with a requisite mindset is through the ballot box. It's an electoral thing, unfortunately. It's a choice thing. In other words, you can't drive it in people apart from saying that apart from threatening people that they're going to lose elections if you don't do X. So people's behavioral tendencies are manipulated by reason of electoral threats. People understand that language. And then in addition to that, the expectation is the electorate will become sophisticated enough that when they go to the polls, they can tell between candidates who's likely to be a public servant as opposed to people who would like to just get into office for the sake of it. Someone stands for your constituency, constituency election as an MP. Whether you believe that your MP wants to get into parliament because he believes in legislation, or whether he has some other ulterior motive. These are
the things. And the more we talk about this, the clearer it becomes that in the end, the ultimate solution might have to start with us electing a good man or woman. Electing a good man or woman as president. That might be the one thing that will...
Parliament.
Yes, all members of parliament. That might be the thing that kickstarts actual action here. When we come back, we'll hear from you. We'll read some of your tweets and messages and get you involved in this conversation. Stay with us. We're back after these.
There's something special happening at Heritage Christian College. Their bustling campus is right in the heart of Amasaman, just behind the Olympic Stadium, and it will amaze you what they are doing there. Heritage Christian College is churning out academic excellence with their comprehensive range of degrees, including Bachelor of Business Administration programs, IT, and theology. Don't forget to ask about their professional programs and short courses. What makes Heritage special? Heritage Christian College takes the academic experience further than ever with one laptop per student, flexible fee payment, entrepreneurial training with financial support, all delivered by a caring faculty working to develop your character and your intellect. Admissions are in progress, so call today on 054 7777 731 and get accepted. For more information, go to hcuc.edu.gh. Heritage Christian College, a university educating compassionate entrepreneurial leaders.
Hey, Charlie, the journey to your house is not for mere mortals. Going through more trotros than the number of people you have dated. The sandwiching of strangers with peculiar body colognes. Hey. Let's not mention the booga skills your trotro drivers demonstrate on the road. The number of mates misses out to your final bus stop. But you've got this. Wake up your fame with Lucozade. Because with Lucozade, you always make it through. Lucozade, restore your energy. This advert is FDA approved.
Ojam, why you make quiet like that?
Oh, Charlie, I'll go do some POP, give somebody where the cornice is not fine, cry.
I always they tell you, see, for decorative roses and cornices, the solution be interface. Them have different imported cornices and roses in different designs and shapes. Installing them be so easy, and it go give your customer the finishing he wants.
Ojam, take me go Interface right now before I lose this customer.
Interface Limited is the leading supplier and installer of finishing input materials for the building and construction industry in Ghana. Call us on 0274-999999 or visit our website at
www.interfacelimited.net. Facebook Interface Limited GH. Instagram interface.limited.
We shouldn't have gone to that party.
Masa, my head is killing me. Is that your stomach?
Yes.
What did you eat? I don't know.
Get rid of your gastric problems with number 10 liver salt. Number 10 gives you quick, effective relief from nausea, indigestion, heartburns, hangovers, and hyperacidity. And with different fruity flavors such as orange and lemon, it's a pretty tasty way to end an uncomfortable situation. Number 10 liver salt from Ernest Chemist, because everyone needs a chemist.
This advert has been vetted and approved by FDA. Yes, it's Nasco Small Appliances Flash Sales Promo. You stay in or get outside. Happy times with your family, picnics, and more. Get go with the iconic Nasco Small Appliances. Your Nasco Kettle, 99 Ghana cedis. Blenders, 279. Nasco Coffee Maker is going for 139 Ghana cedis. Portable Dry Iron, 99 Ghana. Portable Water Boiler, 129 Ghana cedis. Standing Fan, 299. High Quality Popcorn Maker, 259 Ghana cedis. You can take these anywhere as a joyous festive season awaits Ramadan and Easter. Blenders Sandwich Maker. Yes, it is love from Nasco. And for those who want to stay indoors this season, go for your Nasco TV, AC, fridges, washing machines, and more. The iconic Nasco Small Appliances will take you everywhere.
Call 024-243-9437.
Easter means family time and sharing fun moments together. Whether it's traveling up the cold mountains, spending time at home, or hitting up with the boys, it's always exciting. And this season, everyone's invited to enjoy entertainment at its best with GoTV. Come on in and join Africa's biggest local stars, the world's best sports talent, the greatest international sensations, the coolest kids characters, and the hottest reality celebs. With so much on offer, it's the best deal for entertainment at its best. Obiadium. Stay connected on star 759# and make the family time great this Easter. GoTV. Love it.
Yes, it's here again. Giant Tech Limited is here for you for all services on your LG products, be it LG refrigerator, washing machine, air conditioner, and etc. We're giving you free cleaning services from the 3rd of April to 15th of April 2023. Yes, it's free cleaning services on all LG products. Locate Giant Tech Limited in Accra, Spintex Road, behind Orca Deco Showroom, or call us on 055-078-0779 or WhatsApp number 055-154-5454. Terms and conditions apply. Giant Tech Limited, care and delight.
Chobo!
Hey! Hey, knockouts on our side, Jane. I'm the soldier for Kwana.
So we the best say crowd. Dane no. Eh, Politank Sumo Super.
No Politank, no, this are.
Hey, Tobo, now hoko ye dane.
Introducing the all-new Sumo Super from Polytank, Africa's first ever 3-layered tank of its kind, giving you great strength, greater lifespan, and the best price ever. Call our toll-free number on 0800-101-815 or visit polytankgh.com for yours today. Polytank, trusted by generations.
Everybody say Polytank.
Coffee in your cup. Enjoy on the set. The Super Morning Show is always the best.
Back is the Super Morning Show. Your messages have been coming through. We've got a few of them here I'm going to share in a moment before we hear final thoughts from our guest, Professor Kofi Abotsi. Before that, though, did you miss out on the January admission into university? Well, don't worry anymore. Heritage Christian University College is offering you the opportunity to join the April 2023 intake. Heritage Christian College is in Amasaman, behind the Olympic Stadium. It's affiliated to KNUST. It's accredited by GTech. and they have programs like BBAs for accounting, marketing, human resource management, banking and finance, and business information technology management. They've also got BScs for information technology and information security, and a Bachelor of Theology degree. You can also do professional courses like ICA, CIMGC, IHRM, ICM, and media short courses. And of course, they are unique because of their entrepreneurship training with financial support, and the one student, one laptop policy with terms and conditions, as well as the scholarships, which also come with terms and conditions, and affordable and flexible fee structure. Call them on 054 7777 731, or you can dial star 789 star 300 hash to buy an online serial number and apply via their website, which is hcuc.edu.gh. Get 50% tuition waiver if you apply as a fresher in April 2023. Heritage Christian College, a university training compassionate entrepreneurial leaders. Now, don't you just hate it when your favorite light soup or tomato stew tastes a little bit off because you use chicken that is just not fresh? Well, at La Bianca Company Limited, they have got some great news for you. La Bianca introduces you to their latest product made right here in Ghana, Akoko Tasty. Now, with Akoko Tasty, every chicken meal will be a delight. They offer well-bred and slaughtered fresh chicken to suit all of your needs. If you need wings and quarters for your barbecue, gizzards and breasts for your stir fries or sauces, try Akoko Tasty. They offer all chicken parts for all of your culinary needs. If you want to order, call La Bianca on 050-543-1111 or 050-066-0144, or you can just go to their facility. It's at the Tema Fishing Harbour. La Bianca, your #1 frozen foods company. Okay, let's find out what Twitter has been saying, or what you have been saying on Twitter. This one is from @Charles Parker. He says, the Constitution favors and protects our political leaders more than the ordinary Ghanaian. A review will help fight corruption, which is having a negative impact on our country. @Sam_10 says, not just a review, but an entirely new constitution. The one we have doesn't suit our lifestyle anymore. It milks civilians to feed politicians. It's like a web that catches smaller insects but leaves the bigger animals, causing mass destruction to move freely with pride. @OA Flu says, reviewing the constitution won't fix all that, but it's a start. Not all Ghanaians are corrupt, power abusers, indisciplined, arrogant, greedy, power hungry, etc. Certainly, we will have some good and patriotic individuals to change a thing or two. @F_AFF says, from economic management, legislature, rights and freedoms of the citizenry, separation of power, fighting corruption, the lawlessness of security agencies, as well as government officials, our judicial systems will tell you why we should amend the constitution. @Bayward Sung says, there is too much executive power, which ends up weakening state actors. I think there should be a complete decoupling of the executive from the legislature. Officers such as Auditor General, IGP, Chief Justice, etc. should not be appointed by the President. @Hassan Inspira says, it favors government in power without accountability and gives the president too much power to appoint unnecessary ministers, discontinues abandoned infrastructure projects, and only a few party executives benefit instead of all citizens. Well, people have spoken. So Prof, as we wrap this conversation up, what's that one thing you'd like to leave in the mind of the listener? That one call to action, if you will.
First of all, I think the disenchantment with constitutional rule in Ghana, to a limited degree, is called for. But to a certain extent, I think patience is also called for. Now, patience is called for because it's 30 years in our lives, a long time. Mm-hmm. But in the life of a constitution, it's not. Our cultural tendencies, our own personal tendencies, our tendencies as a country, we are evolving. Sometimes we get to a point of inflection. Sometimes we get to crossroads. We're not sure exactly what the forward movement is. But the disenchantment that leads to people calling for overhaul and even sometimes overthrow is a bit out of place.
I mean,
from the standpoint of constitutional
overthrow is unlawful.
That's entirely out of the way. I mean, that's not something you should even contemplate. Contemplating itself is criminal in Ghana. Oh yes, So you should even contemplate it. But overhaul can itself be debilitating. So the point I'm making is, by and large, there are major issues with the Constitution that needs to be dealt with. And as I've indicated, for me, there are not actually issues with the Constitution. There are issues with the operation of the Constitution. They are two different things. But if we would like to even put them together, the key things that need to be changed about the Constitution, I think, moving forward, I think we should have a process that should begin in Parliament. So far, there's been a lot of the ex-cathedral conversation, the outside Parliament conversation. We should have the inside Parliament conversation starting. That should start. I would like the business of the House. I would like an MP. I would like the majority leader, the minority leader, the leadership of Parliament. I would like this to become a business of the House. It should get on the business of the House. It should start there. Then Parliament should have its own roadmap. And that roadmap can then include all kinds of bodies and people, including civil society, regular folks, citizens of our country, experts, etc. We can have everyone then brought together on a parliamentary platform. That parliamentary platform, together with its roadmap, must then come out with a systemic engagement, a strategic engagement with the president. So there must be a roadmap that should be carefully followed, bearing in mind we have elections in Ghana. Because in 2024, once we go past the first quarter, the conversations in Ghana will change. It all becomes elections. It all becomes parties predisposing themselves towards winning December 2024. So whatever we do today must be calculated to potentially terminate by June of 2024. And if anything at all, we'll probably be getting to the electoral side in terms of the referenda side and completing the process. I think, unfortunately, at the moment, as I indicated, too much of the conversation has been outside Parliament. So the conversation outside Parliament should be ending. I am gratified and I'm heartened by the fact that the majority leader, as I indicated, is playing a pivotal role in the current conversation, trying to move things forward. I think the process should be sped up, but in addition to that, the majority leader should get the conversation into Parliament. And I'm convinced that given his leadership and the energy he's shown thus far, should that happen, I'm convinced that we should be able to get a provision or two out of the way, at least before the end of 2024.
My prayer is that the next time we have a conversation about this, it will be to review some actual action that is being taken. We are all crossing our fingers and saying our prayers for that. Professor Kofi Abotsi, we can't thank you enough for spending your morning with us. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, Prof. Ernest Kofi Abotsi is the Dean of the Law School at UPSA. There's more on the Super Morning Show after these.